Welcome into the Big Little Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Patrick Previty. That is Andrew Greig. The Miami Hurricanes are now one win away from being the national champions. They beat Ole Miss in the Fiesta Bowl 31-27. First thoughts on this game before we head into maybe a potential national championship preview.
Yeah, so this game played out a lot differently than I feel like a lot of people expected it to play out. Miami was extremely dominant through the first half, if not the first 3 quarters of this football game. Felt like they were not, well, it didn't feel like they were dominating the time of possession, and Ole Miss was kind of just hanging in there. Like Keyone Lacy, 75-yard rush touchdown, really helped their case in the first half. But besides that, I mean, Miami, every single time they had the ball, they were going for 5 to 7 minute drives, and it felt like they were crossing the Ole Miss 50-yard line, or they're going into Ole Miss territory every single drive that they had the football. The Ole Miss defense didn't really come to play as much as they did in that Georgia game. Obviously, the first time they played Georgia didn't punt in the second half, and it felt more reminiscent of that game than what they showed the second time around. And although Georgia did score points in their last game, but still, Miami's offensive line specifically was able to push them around when they weren't taking false start penalties. And you can talk about the officiating both ways. It was definitely, you can say the last call of the game was debatable at the very best, but I think that's a call where you kind of just leave it up to those two guys are playing football, and it's the last play of the game, especially in the Hail Mary situation. So overall, I think Miami was the dominant team, and I think they deserved to win that game. But it was a nail biter for sure.
Yeah, I have no issues with the non PI call or no call at the very end of the game there. Miami, in my opinion, they shot themselves in the foot. They had a lot of self-inflicted wounds from this game as far as the false starts were concerned on the offensive line, but I felt like they kind of got hosed as far as the targeting call. I feel like if you don't call one targeting, it's got to be that way for both, or you can flip it and say that they were both targeting. I think by the book, they're probably both targeting. So at the end of the day, I felt like the refs probably weren't exactly on Miami's side in this game, but still not the end of the world because obviously they were able to pull it out. They were the better team. I think there were some things that Ole Miss was able to take advantage of. There were obviously some injuries for Miami, and Ole Miss was able to pass the ball. There really wasn't a pass rush for Miami that you felt like you had seen in the 2 previous playoff games, or one that you felt like you had seen all year. But where did they make up with that? Their own pass game, which we actually have not seen very much of in the last 2 playoff games. Carson Beck, you asked him to contribute to winning this game, and he was able to do so. I think that was super positive. And anytime you run the ball 51 times and you hold it for 41 minutes, you're going to put yourself in a pretty good position to win a game. That last drive was immaculate, makes Carson Beck worth every penny. And they're looking pretty good. I tell you what.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, the script was completely flipped from the last 2 playoff games. It felt like obviously the conditions were different in the last 2 playoff games, right? You go on the road to Texas A&M and you play against 110,000, 100,000 plus fans that are actively cheering against you. The winds are swirling at like 30 miles per hour. No one can make a kick. You kind of just don't want to force the big air. I feel like that's why Shannon Dawson's play calling was less aggressive in that game. And then you're playing against the Ohio State, one of the best football teams to possibly ever be assembled, right? Their only loss in the Big Ten championship game to Indiana. They have 4 probably first rounders on that defense. You just really don't want to make the big mistake, and the defense was playing so well. But in this game, it's completely flipped, right? Ruben Bain and Hakeem Mesidor only combined for 1 quarterback pressure and 0 sacks. The defense in general played well, but there were some injuries on the defense. And towards the end of the back half of the game, especially in the fourth quarter, it felt like Trinidad Chambliss was just driving Ole Miss down the field. So you really needed Carson Beck to step up in this game, and for everything that he's gone throughout the regular season, right after that Louisville game, the 4 interceptions, the SMU game, people thought Miami just might be out of the playoff completely. He showed up in this game. He showed up towards all of the rest of the regular season, and just put everything together for Miami, and did what he needed to do in the first 2 games, and then kind of sealed it this past game. And it's going to be an exciting national championship, and we'll see what Carson Beck we get. But either way, it's going to be a fun game.
Yeah, Carson Beck has definitely kind of rewrote his legacy, because I'm glad you mentioned what was wrong with the defense, because it wasn't just that Ole Miss has a great offense. You certainly have to give credit where credit is due, but this Miami team has certainly been able to shut down some other teams, score, against Ohio State. They've been able to kind of dictate what they've wanted to do, and that's get to the quarterback, take a little bit of pressure off that secondary, but the secondary itself is actually very talented, especially when you compare it to last season. But with the injuries on the back end and no serious pass rush for most of the game, you're thinking, okay, just hold on here, and we give it to the offense, and they're going to be able to go down and score. Malachi Tony, great as usual. Keelan Marion, just probably had his best game of the entire season. So he's got to be very happy with that. CJ Daniels made some great catches there. And even with Elijah Lofton leaving the game, they still got tons of production from the rest of their receiving core. And that was something that I think is super positive, especially you could hopefully build on in the national championship game against whether that is Oregon or Indiana.
Yeah, I'll start with the DBs part of that, the portion you just talked about. It was very interesting throughout courses of that game where it felt like an interception or maybe the three that they dropped could have helped seal the game. Maybe not seal it because the points in which the interceptions happened in like towards the end of the first half, or the dropped interceptions, I should say, towards the end of the first half and in parts of the second half wouldn't have really sealed the game, but it would have definitely flipped momentum. And if Miami could just hold on to the football, it felt like that really would have done numbers for them. But yeah, the DBs played as well as they could for guys that were coming in on the fly, and then also I think that having to cover Ole Miss's receivers, however good they are, relative to Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith, is maybe just a sigh of relief coming off last game. So I think that they played very well. And then the Miami receivers, man, like they stepped up to make really big plays. Obviously, the Malachi Tony catch that didn't end up counting, the one on the sideline that he caught with one-handed, no ball or anything like that, just puts his hand up, snags it down. That was an amazing catch, although it didn't count. Keelan Marion made big play after big play, goes down the middle on that touchdown drive and picks up a huge first down for the Canes. And just in general, the receiving core played really well today. Carson Beck, it can't be like circling back to him. Obviously, he did it with his arm, but also his legs in this game. The game-winning touchdown comes off Carson Beck run where he hadn't scored with his legs since I think it was week 4 or week 5 against USF. It was against USF, just forget the exact week. But yeah, he did on the ground with his legs, and he has been doing it on the ground for the last 2 games, and even parts of that Texas A&M game. And it was very refreshing to see, because when he was strolling in, it kind of just felt like everything came together for as a Miami Hurricanes fan.
Yeah, the Carson Beck, I don't know where he's going to end up in the spring, but I tell you what, he certainly has remade his image, uh, and it's kind of completely flipped everything. I don't know exactly, like I said, where like if he'll be a 4th round pick or something like that, but at a certain point, you got to look at his games against ranked teams, his overall record as a starter, and you're going to have to kind of say, well, he at least doesn't seem like the big games are too much for him, and it's a cliche, but that's certainly the case that it is. Also, this Miami defense dropped a ton of interceptions, so we're talking a lot about like how Ole Miss was able to move the ball down the field. They certainly were able to, and this Ole Miss team is extremely talented, playing way above expectations. You absolutely have to call this a major win, this entire run for them. But still, this Miami defense did, even though they were shorthanded, they dropped so many interceptions in this game. And that would have really turned this game into something completely different than what we saw last night. But still, Miami was able to overcome it, and they were still able to get the ball back into the offense's hands when they needed to. And also felt like Shannon Dawson, you can pick apart certain plays, but they knew exactly who they were, or they know exactly who they are, and they love to stick by it. And I wouldn't want to see anything else in the national championship game other than this team just trying to push whoever it is off the line of scrimmage, because they've been able to do it, win or lose, in every single game so far this year.
Yeah, and I do want to circle back to the story that is Ole Miss a little bit, right? Like Pete Golding kind of leading this team, Lane Kiffin leaving the team right before the playoff starts. And it was just kind of like a story. It would have been a storybook ending had they been able to get to the national championship and eventually win it. Obviously, they're not going to be able to do that this season, but I want to give them their props, because the fact that it was just a crazy scenario, right? Your offensive coordinator splitting time between LSU and Ole Miss, you lose it like a ton, maybe not a ton, but a bunch of your best assistants and just people that are on your staff, and just to be able to kind of group together, avenge that Georgia loss they had in the regular season, and then all like come together to put up as big of a performance you could have versus a Miami team that was playing extremely well to that point, literally coming down to the last play of the game. I think that there has to be a lot said for that Ole Miss team, and I hope that they do get remembered over the course of history, because and for their sake, I hope that LSU doesn't turn into like some powerhouse, because I'd love to just see like Pete Golding hold on to more wins than Lane Kiffin in like CFP era for as long as possible.
Yeah, for Lane Kiffin, you're going to have to. Now the expectation is you're going to have to win a couple playoff games, and that was always going to be the expectation, because it's national championship or bust. It feels like, if you ask the LSU boosters, but still, now you're going to be kind of compared to this run, because what could it have been if you had Lane Kiffin? I still think that they probably went about as far as they could or were able to go, which is still just an amazing testament to this team that they were able to do it without Lane Kiffin. But super impressive. Really quick before we get out, we're recording this before Oregon, Indiana. Who, if you're Miami, would you rather play?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting. It's interesting either way, right? Oregon has five stars on their team, right? They have probably the number 2 overall pick, number 1 or 2, depending on who you like it, whether you're the Rams or the Raiders or the Jets general managers. Yeah, I think that I think that you'd rather play Oregon just because of the fact that how well Indiana's playing over the course of their season. Because of the fact that they've beat Oregon this season, they've shown that they've just been a dominant team. They've also beat Ohio State. They've went undefeated. Kurt Signetti seems like he has a chip on his shoulder, even when the team he has only lost 1 game since he's been there. Yeah, no, I think that just for all the storylines involved, probably also the whole country will be rooting against you. Besides anybody from South Florida, if you are like if Indiana does win, so I think you'd rather play Oregon. But that being said, as I mentioned, the kind of build up to that, Oregon does have some players, and it's going to be a tough game no matter what. You really want to. This is going to be either way one of the toughest roads to the championship ever.
Yeah, definitely, easily one of the toughest roads, just simply because you have to win, 2 more games than you would otherwise, especially if you don't get a bye. But I would say Oregon, just because I feel like Indiana's line of scrimmage is better, so it's less of a challenge in that regard. But I still think Oregon as a team, I'm in full agreement with you, is extremely talented. I think we're getting here, 2 of the top 3 teams left in college football, obviously, but I think that both of those teams were better than Ole Miss, so I'll give you that.
Yeah, that being said, just final comment. That being said, I want to clarify a little bit. I think that Oregon, I think that Oregon is the team you'd rather play, but I also think Oregon's going to win that game. Just going off on a limb here, kind of separate from that as an aside. I think Oregon wins the game tonight, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, sure. We could both pick it. I'll say Indiana wins.